See, most Jewish children just get to have one bar mitzvah, but I got to have 3. It wasn't because of any spiritual milestone I had achieved. I wasn't pegged as a religious prodigy as a child. It was for a far different reason. See, my mother was obsessed with Israel. She would go there every year and come back and say, "It's the only place that makes me feel alive." She would hire inept Israelis to fix things in her house. And they would leave things half done, shooting sparks, but in her mind, it was her small way of preventing another Holocaust. Because if there had been an Israel, there would have never been a Hitler. So I shouldn't have been surprised when nearing my 13th birthday, my mother came over to me and said, "Leo, for your bar mitzvah, we're going to do something special. We are going to do something holy. We are going to go to the Holy Land of Israel." And I responded the way that any soon-to-be man would respond when given the opportunity to embrace millennium-old holy tradition. I said, "I don't want a stupid bar mitzvah, stupid Israel. I just want to get my ear pierced. I don't even want a party." And she said, "Someday you will appreciate it and you will thank me." See, I had always imagined the lavish party I would receive. My brother Ron loved basketball, so the entire bar mitzvah reception area was festooned with basketball nets with life-size cutouts of Larry Bird and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. My brother Andy loved fishing, so all the centerpieces on the tables were tropical fish, and there was aqua-tinged paper all over the room, and they hired a robot named Official to go around and greet people. Mazel tov, mazel tov. And more importantly, I remember the vast amount of money they received as gifts and the great cars they bought when they were 16. And this was also my dream, but it was not meant to be. Before we went on the big trip, I had a consolation prize, which was my first bar mitzvah. And it was a small party in Maryland, nothing like my brother's. We catered it ourselves, and I remember I was seething with resentment for my lost revenue. My mother took a photo of me from when I played football, something I had quit after 8 days, and blew it up as a sign-in board. And I remember I won one small victory and insisted the DJ play my favorite song. And as everyone in the room stared at the ceiling and looked at the floor, and the DJ speakers blared 18 in Life by Skid Row, I learned the difference between songs you love and songs you should not interrupt a group of middle-aged Jews dancing the hora to play. And then we were off to Israel. My second bar mitzvah was at the holiest site in Judaism, the Western Wall. It was a mild day in Jerusalem in June. It was about 110. And I sat there, family around and friends, reading through my hated Torah portion for the second time. And a miracle happened. The heavens opened up, and a horde of flies descended down. And started descending into my mouth and my eyes. And as I blinked away the fly carcasses and the sweat, I glared at my mother, giving my own hateful look. And telepathically, she looked back at me and said, "Someday you will appreciate this, and you will thank me." I doubted that. My third and thankfully final bar mitzvah was at an octogenarian Holocaust survivor synagogue in Petah Tikva, Israel. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and she thought this would be very meaningful. So I blew through my Torah portion for the third and final time, staring at the unfamiliar weathered faces, nodding off or gazing into space. And we had a small reception afterwards in which I awkwardly greeted Polish-speaking strangers. My grandfather would bring people over. "Leo, this is Chaim Finkelwasser. His uncle was my uncle's tailor in Kablacniks, Vilna, Poland." And they would awkwardly land drooling elderly kisses on my forehead and my neck, bits of spittle mixed with half-chewed food dripping into my sweat-stained body. And I would force a smile, but behind my eyes I was thinking the most hateful thoughts. I'm not just gonna get my ear pierced. I'll show her. I'm gonna get my nipples pierced, and my tongue, and every piece of my body, and then I'm gonna get tattoos, and then I'm gonna run through the Jewish Community Center of Greater Washington screaming, "Look at me, look at me! I am Sarah Dekelbaum's son." And then, finally, we flew back to America. My mother with her cherished memories, me with my cachet of Kiddush cups, monogrammed challah covers, and little tiny Torahs. Things that I would never look at again, much less buy a car with. And as the plane took off, I looked at her and I said, I will never forgive you. And from that moment on, every year, I went out of my way to remind my mother that I still would never forgive her. Through college, through high school, and even afterwards, we would casually pass after dinner one night, and I'd say, Mom, remember my bar mitzvah? I still resent you. Until about 12 years later, I was catering to make extra money. I ended up catering a very expensive bar mitzvah. And at this very expensive bar mitzvah, the parents of this boy had paid for these very expensive floodlights to highlight the expensive balloons they had put up. And this man and his man friends had found out that these lights get very hot. So they took the plastic monogrammed plastic centerpieces off every table and put them on the very hot lights. And then later on they took the tops off all the salt and pepper shakers and threw them around the room. And so later on that evening, when me and the rest of the catering crew were chiseling off congealed plastic and sweeping up salt, I had an epiphany. A 13-year-old boy is not actually a man. And a 13-year-old boy doesn't deserve anything. These lavish parties, they're for the parents to celebrate having survived 13 years of raising a son. And if I was able to play a small role in my mother having cherished memories of her grandmother beaming at the Western Wall while I read the Torah, or my grandfather leading the Torah service at the synagogue of his Holocaust surviving peers, I'm happy to do that for her. So after we finished cleaning up the party, I called her up and said, you know what, Mom? Thank you for making me go to Israel. But to be totally honest, I've still never taken my earrings out.